Story number 1. The Never Sleeping Neighbor. I still remember the day we moved into Evergreen Heights. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a warm, golden hue over the quiet suburban neighborhood. As a single mother, relocating from the bustling city to this serene enclave was a breath of fresh air for me and my 8-year-old son, Ethan. The promise of peace, safety, and a supportive community was exactly what I needed to start anew. Our new home was a charming 2-story house with a neatly trimmed lawn and large windows that framed picturesque views of the surrounding greenery. What caught my attention the most, however, was the house directly across the street, an old, slightly run-down structure that remained brightly lit well into the late hours of the night. The house belonged to Mr. Richard Harris, a middle-aged man with an air of quiet mystery about him. At first glance, Richard seemed like a typical neighbor, reserved but friendly during brief encounters. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes often lingered on me longer than necessary, even when I closed my curtains. The house's perpetual illumination, combined with his unwavering gaze, made me uneasy, but I convinced myself it was merely a product of his solitary lifestyle. The first letter. A few weeks into our stay, the unease began to escalate in ways I couldn't anticipate. It started with the letters. One evening, after tucking Ethan into bed, I found an envelope slipped under our front door. There was no return address, and the handwriting was elegant yet unfamiliar. Inside was a single sheet of paper with neat, precise writing. I see you. I know your routines. Stay safe. My heart raced as I reread the message, the words echoing ominously in my mind. Assuming it was some prank or the work of a disturbed individual, I dismissed it and went to bed. However, the next night, another letter arrived. Don't trust them. They watch from the shadows. I began to feel paranoid, constantly checking the locks on our doors and windows. Ethan noticed my anxiety and asked, "Mom, what's wrong?" I forced a reassuring smile, trying to keep my fears at bay. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just some strange letters. Don't worry about it." Confronting Richard. As days turned into weeks, the letters became more frequent and increasingly disturbing. They detailed my daily activities with unnerving accuracy: when I woke up, what I ate for breakfast, our bedtime routine. The messages evolved from simple warnings to explicit threats. "Last time I saw, you were walking to the store alone. Don't let it happen again." The fear for my and Ethan's safety mounted. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to confront Richard. One evening, I mustered the courage to knock on his door. Richard answered promptly, his stern expression softened slightly as he recognized me. "Good evening, Mark. What can I do for you?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "Mr. Harris, I need to ask you something. Have you been sending me these letters?" He frowned, his eyes narrowing. "Letters? I don't know what you're talking about. I've been receiving anonymous letters that seem to know everything about me and my family. They're threatening. Do you know anything about this?" Richard sighed, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Mark, you need to be careful. There are things in this neighborhood that you don't understand. Those letters, they're a warning." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean? What should I be careful of?" He looked around nervously before leaning in closer. "There are forces here, dark forces tied to this land. You moved into Evergreen Heights seeking peace, but sometimes peace comes at a price. Stay vigilant and avoid the old woods behind your house. They're not safe." I stared at him, trying to process his cryptic warning. "Are you saying the letters are related to something supernatural?" Richard nodded solemnly. "I've seen things, heard things. The spirits of those who've suffered here aren't at rest. They're restless, seeking something they lost." The nightmares began. After our conversation, things only spiraled further into darkness. Ethan began experiencing vivid nightmares about men being burned alive, their screams echoing through the night. I woke up drenched in sweat, his cries piercing the silence of our home. One particularly harrowing night, I found Ethan sitting on the edge of his bed, eyes wide with fear. "Mom, there's someone in the shadows," he whispered, pointing towards his closet. I approached him cautiously, opening the door to find nothing but his stuffed animals staring back at me. "It's okay, Ethan. There's nothing here." But the feeling of unease lingered, making it difficult to reassure him. The nightmares persisted, each one more intense than the last, and the letters continued to arrive, their messages growing more urgent and terrifying. Discovering the truth. Driven by desperation, I decided to delve into the history of Evergreen Heights, hoping to uncover the source of the curse that seemed to plague us. I spent countless hours at the local library, poring over old newspaper clippings and town records. What I discovered was chilling. Years ago, a group of men had attacked our gas station across the street, burning it down in a brutal act of violence. Several people had lost their lives, their bodies never recovered, their souls rumored to haunt the area. The gas station had been rebuilt, but the new owner had kept the old pump as a relic, a silent reminder of the tragedy. According to local lore, the spirits of the victims were trapped, their anger and pain fueling the curse that now targeted anyone who dared to disrupt the peace of Evergreen Heights. Armed with this knowledge, I realized the letters were not just random acts of intimidation, they were the spirits' attempts to communicate, to warn me of the darkness that lingered beneath the surface. The confrontation. One night, after another night of horrific dreams, I decided it was time to face the source of the curse. Armed with candles and a journal filled with notes, I made my way to the old gas station across the street. The area was shrouded in thick fog, the pale blue neon lights casting ghostly shadows on the ground. As I approached the pump, I felt a presence, a coldness that seeped into my bones. The air was heavy with sorrow and rage, the remnants of the tragedy that had occurred years ago. I began to chant a prayer I had found in one of the old records, hoping to bring peace to the restless souls. Suddenly, a figure materialized before me, a man with a charred face, his eyes burning with an unearthly fire. "Why are you disturbing our rest?" he growled, his voice a mix of pain and anger. "I'm sorry for what happened. I want to help you find peace," I pleaded, tears welling up in my eyes. He stared at me for a moment before speaking. "You cannot break the cycle so easily. The pain, the loss, it's too deep." Determined, I pressed on. "Please, let us help. We want to move forward, to honor your memory." The figure's expression softened slightly, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "There is a way, but it requires sacrifice. You must acknowledge our suffering and ensure that our story is never forgotten." I nodded, willing to do whatever it took to free my family from this nightmare. As I recited the final words of the prayer, the air around me began to shimmer, the spirits surrounding me in a whirlwind of sorrow and gratitude. One by one, they began to fade, their anguished cries transforming into peaceful whispers. The curse lifted, the oppressive darkness dissipating as the spirits found the closure they had long sought. The old gas station stood silent once more, its tragic history finally acknowledged and honored. The aftermath. Returning home, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, the nightmare ceasing as peace settled over our home. Ethan slept soundly, free from the terrors that had plagued him, and the letters stopped arriving, the spirits finally at rest. Richard, the ever-watchful neighbor, seemed to soften, his cold gaze replaced by a warmth that hadn't been there before. "You did well, Mark," he said one evening as we crossed paths in the neighborhood. "You brought peace to this place." I smiled, grateful for his support. It wasn't easy, but we made it through. As the days turned into months, Evergreen Heights regained its tranquility. The curse that had once threatened our lives was nothing more than a dark chapter in the town's history, a reminder of the resilience and strength that had carried us through the darkness. Yet, every now and then, when the wind rustles through the trees and the neon lights of the old gas station flicker in the distance, I'm reminded of the night we faced the shadows and emerged victorious. It's a story I share with Ethan, a tale of courage and love that taught us the true meaning of family and the enduring power of hope. And as I watch him grow, free from the nightmares that once haunted us, I know that the spirits of Evergreen Heights have found their peace, and so have we. Story number 2. The Never Sleeping Neighbor. I moved to Evergreen Heights with the hope of finding peace, away from the relentless chaos of city life. As a single mother, the quiet suburb promised a safe haven for me and my 12-year-old son, Jack. Our new house was an old, charming structure at the end of Maple Street, surrounded by towering oak trees and a manicured lawn that seemed untouched by time. The neighborhood was serene, with friendly neighbors and a sense of community that was exactly what I needed. But not everyone in Evergreen Heights was as welcoming as the rest. Directly across the street stood a dilapidated house, perpetually illuminated by a single porched light that burned through the darkest nights. The house belonged to the Harris family, a middle-aged couple with 2 children. They kept to themselves, rarely engaging with the rest of the neighborhood. Their windows were always covered with heavy curtains, and their lights flickered on and off at the same times each night, casting eerie shadows that danced across their facade. At first, I dismissed my unease as the natural wariness that comes with moving to a new place. However, Jack's curious nature couldn't let it go. He began to observe the Harris family more closely, noting their peculiar habits. They never took out their trash, no matter how full the bins became. The sounds from their house were unsettling, occasional loud thuds, muffled screams, and whispers that seemed to seep through the walls late at night. One chilly October evening, Jack approached me with wide eyes and a trembling voice. "Mom, I heard screaming from the Harris house again. It's been happening for weeks." I tried to comfort him. "It's probably just some argument or maybe someone in trouble. Neighbors have their own lives, Jack." But Jack wasn't convinced. His curiosity turned into obsession. He started spending hours peering through his bedroom window, watching the Harris house intently. His grades began to slip, and he became more withdrawn, fixating on the mysterious family across the street. One night, around midnight, Jack couldn't sleep. The house next door was eerily quiet, but then a sudden scream shattered the silence. He bolted upright in bed, eyes wide with fear. "Mom, there's someone in the house. They're screaming." I rushed to his room, my heart pounding. "Calm down, Jack. Maybe it's just a bad dream." But Jack was insistent. "No, I saw someone. A girl. She's standing at the window, looking right at me." I grabbed a flashlight and we both went to Jack's room. Peering through the curtains, we saw nothing unusual. The house across was as silent as ever, its windows still covered. I tried to reassure Jack, but his fear was palpable. The next morning, things took a more sinister turn. I found a folded piece of paper tucked under our front door. Unfolding it, I read the chilling message. "Save me." My blood ran cold. "Jack, look at this." He stared at the note, eyes wide with fear. "Do you think the girl is trying to communicate with us?" I didn't have an answer. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to investigate the Harris family. After some digging, I discovered that the Harris house had a dark history. 10 years ago, a devastating fire had consumed the home, claiming the lives of the entire family, parents, and 2 children. The fire had been suspicious, with reports of a struggle and evidence pointing towards foul play. Despite thorough investigations, no one was ever charged, and the case remained unsolved. The neighborhood had been haunted by the tragic event, with rumors of restless spirits and unexplained phenomena surrounding the Harris house. The house was eventually sold and resold, but every new family seemed to meet the same mysterious fate, disappearing without a trace. As I pieced together the fragments of the past, the pieces started to align unsettlingly with our present. The letters, the screams, and Jack's visions all pointed towards the Harris family trying to reach out, seeking help to break free from whatever bound them to that forsaken place. One evening, determined to uncover the truth, I decided to confront the entity myself. Armed with the knowledge I had gathered and a resolve fueled by maternal instinct, I approached the Harris house. The air grew colder as I neared, the once familiar house now exuding an oppressive aura of sorrow and anger. I knocked on the door, but there was no response. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking ominously. The interior was charred and blackened, remnants of the fire still visible in the scorched walls and debris. The house felt alive, the shadows moving as if whispering secrets long forgotten. As I ventured deeper into the wreckage, the temperature plummeted, my breath visible in the frigid air. Suddenly, I heard it, the soft, haunting melody of a music box playing a sad tune. Following the sound, I entered what used to be the living room, now reduced to ashes and rubble. In the corner stood a broken music box, still playing its mournful tune. Approaching it, I felt a presence behind me. Turning around, I saw a ghostly figure, a young girl with hollow eyes and a sorrowful expression. "Help us," she whispered, her voice echoing through the empty house. Tears welled up in my eyes as I knelt beside her. "What do you need? How can I help you?" Her form flickered, the ghostly image wavering like a candle flame in the wind. "The entity, it keeps us here. It feeds on our pain, our fear. You have to set us free." I looked around, sensing more spirits lingering in the house, their eyes filled with desperation. "What do I need to do?" The girl pointed towards the basement. "Find the chamber. Destroy the source of its power. Only then can we be free." Determined to save the Harris family, I made my way to the basement. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness. The air was thick with malevolent energy, and the walls seemed to close in around me. At the bottom, I found a hidden chamber, a small room lined with old symbols and artifacts that pulsed with dark energy. In the center stood an altar, upon which lay an old, ornate dagger and a tome bound in human skin. The room radiated an oppressive force, making it difficult to breathe. I knew what I had to do. Gathering my courage, I grabbed the dagger and began to recite the incantations from the tome, hoping to break the curse that held the spirits captive. As I chanted, the entity manifested, a towering, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes and tendrils of darkness swirling around it. It laughed, a sound filled with rage and malice. "You cannot destroy me. I am eternal." But I pressed on, fueled by the desperate pleas of the Harris spirits. With a final, powerful incantation, I plunged the dagger into the tome, the symbols on its cover glowing brightly before collapsing into ashes. The entity screamed, a sound that reverberated through the house and then dissipated into nothingness. A wave of relief washed over me as the oppressive energy lifted. The spirits of the Harris family began to fade, their forms becoming more transparent until they finally vanished, leaving behind a peaceful silence. Exhausted but triumphant, I made my way back to our house, the night air now calm and serene. Jack was asleep, unaware of the horrors that had unfolded to save him and our neighbors. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences ceased. The letters stopped arriving, and Jack's nightmares faded into distant memories. The Harris house, now devoid of any malevolent presence, stood silent once more, a testament to the power of courage and love. But the experience left an indelible mark on both of us. I became more attuned to the unseen forces that lingered in the world, and Jack, though still a curious teenager, learned the importance of understanding and empathy. Evergreen Heights returned to its peaceful routine, the tragedy of the Harris family now a forgotten chapter in the town's history. Yet, sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind rustles through the trees, I catch a faint whisper, a lingering echo of the night we saved the lost souls and broke the curse that held them captive. And as I look out the window at our tranquil neighborhood, I am reminded that even in the most peaceful places, darkness can lurk, waiting to be confronted by those brave enough to seek the truth. Story number 3. Neighbor Without a Face. The old apartment building stood tall and imposing in the heart of the city, its brick facade weathered by time and countless seasons. Evergreen Heights was a tight-knit community where neighbors knew each other's names and often shared stories over the laundry room table or during impromptu gatherings in the courtyard. It was the kind of place where you felt a sense of belonging, a haven amidst the chaos of urban life. When I, Emily Thompson, moved into apartment 3B, I was eager to embrace the tranquility and camaraderie that Evergreen Heights promised. As a freelance graphic designer, working from home had its perks, but the isolation sometimes gnawed at me. The bustling city outside my window was a stark contrast to the peaceful sanctuary I hoped to find within these walls. The building itself was charming, with its high ceilings, large windows, and a modest lobby adorned with potted plants and vintage artwork. The neighbors were friendly enough, each with their own quirks and personalities that added to the vibrant tapestry of the community. However, there was one apartment that always stood out, a top-floor unit, apartment 10A, where the residents were an enigma. No one seemed to visit, and the curtains were perpetually drawn, concealing the interior from prying eyes. Initially, I didn't pay much attention to apartment 10A. In a building as old as Evergreen Heights, it wasn't uncommon for some units to be vacant or rarely occupied. But as weeks turned into months, subtle changes in my surroundings began to unsettle me, all pointing towards that mysterious apartment. It started innocently enough. Late one night, I was jolted awake by the sound of furniture scraping against the floor. Groggy and confused, I glanced at the clock. It was almost midnight. The noises persisted, a rhythmic scraping that seemed deliberate. Curiosity overcame my exhaustion, and I decided to investigate. Quietly, I made my way down the hallway, the dim lighting casting long shadows that danced eerily on the walls. Each step I took amplified the sounds, making my heart race with a mix of fear and intrigue. As I approached apartment 10A, the door was slightly ajar, a faint light flickering within. Hesitantly, I pushed the door open, expecting to find someone who might have forgotten to lock it. The interior was empty, the rooms furnished with outdated decor that hadn't changed in decades. The furniture was rearranged haphazardly, as if someone had been searching for something and had left in a hurry. My eyes were drawn to the living room, where a large mirror stood against the wall, its surface dusty and streaked with fingerprints. As I stepped closer, I felt a sudden chill, the temperature dropping noticeably. The mirror reflected my image back at me, but something was off. Behind me, in the reflection, stood a figure, tall and indistinct, its form blurred and shadowy. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned to face the empty room, but there was no one there. I blinked, trying to shake off the eerie sensation. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. The figure in the mirror remained, its presence unsettling and unnatural. Gathering my courage, I reached out to touch the mirror, my fingers grazing the cold glass. The moment my skin made contact, a surge of energy pulsed through me, and the reflection shifted. The figure's face came into focus, or rather, the absence of one. A hollow void where features should be, eyes dark and empty, staring back at me with an intensity that felt almost accusatory. I recoiled in horror, stepping back as the mirror seemed to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. The figure began to move, slowly advancing towards me within the confines of the glass. Terrified, I stumbled backward, my mind racing to comprehend what I was witnessing. It couldn't be real, I thought, trying to rationalize the supernatural elements creeping into my reality. But deep down, I knew something was profoundly wrong. Days passed, and the incident in apartment 10A left a lingering unease that I couldn't shake. At night, the house would creak and groan as if whispering secrets, and the sounds of movement in the abandoned apartment above became more frequent and more deliberate. Friends who visited me remarked on my distant demeanor, unaware of the haunting presence that seemed to follow me wherever I went. One particularly restless night, I was jolted awake by the sound of frantic footsteps on the ceiling above my bedroom. My heart raced as I sat up, clutching the sheets tightly to my chest. The footsteps were erratic, a stark contrast to the slow, deliberate scraping I had heard before. I strained my ears, trying to discern any pattern, but the sounds were random and unnerving. Gathering my resolve, I decided it was time to confront the mystery head-on. Armed with a flashlight and a recording device, I made my way to apartment 10A, determined to uncover the truth behind the faceless figure that haunted my reflections. As I approached the door, I noticed the same slight flicker of light emanating from within, a beacon in the darkness. I knocked gently, waiting for a response that never came. The door remained closed, but the window behind it was shattered, glass strewn across the floor of the hallway. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. The apartment was even more dilapidated than before, with cracks in the walls and ceiling, and the remnants of a life abruptly abandoned. I moved cautiously through the space, the flashlight casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. As I reached the living room, I felt a sudden drop in temperature, my breath visible in the icy air. The mirror was still there, but it was larger now, spanning the entire wall. I approached it, my hands trembling as I reached out to touch the surface once more. This time, the reflection was clearer, revealing more details of the figure behind me. It was a woman, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable, or rather, non-existent. Her face was a smooth, blank canvas, devoid of any distinguishing features. Her presence was both mesmerizing and horrifying, a silent sentinel watching me with an intensity that left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. The figure didn't respond, but the air around me seemed to vibrate with a silent scream, the energy palpable and oppressive. I backed away, my mind racing to find an explanation, a way to dispel the nightmare unfolding before me. In a desperate attempt to break the hold the figure had on me, I turned my attention to the room itself, searching for any clues or signs that might explain the haunting. My eyes landed on a dusty bookshelf in the corner, its contents a mishmash of old novels, broken picture frames, and forgotten trinkets. Among the clutter, I noticed a worn diary, its pages yellowed with age and the cover marred by scuffs and scratches. Heart-pounding, I reached for the diary, carefully flipping through its fragile pages. The handwriting was elegant yet hurried, the entries filled with a mix of mundane daily activities and increasingly frantic pleas for help. It chronicled the life of a woman named Eleanor Harris, the wife of the previous resident of apartment 10A, who had mysteriously vanished without a trace 10 years ago. The final entry was particularly chilling. They come for me every night. The shadows, the whispers, they won't let me go. Please, if anyone finds this, find a way to free us. We're trapped here, unable to escape their grasp. Tears welled up in my eyes as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Eleanor Harris had been tormented by an unseen force, her spirit unable to find peace even after death. The faceless figure was her manifestation, a desperate attempt to communicate and seek salvation. Determined to help, I closed the diary and began to search the apartment for any rituals or means that might release Eleanor's spirit from its eternal torment. My flashlight beam swept across the room, landing on a small altar adorned with candles and symbols etched into the wood. The air was thick with the energy of the past, the very essence of Eleanor's suffering palpable in the space. I arranged the candles, lighting each one with a trembling hand, and began to chant the incantations I had found scribbled in the diary's margins. The words felt foreign on my tongue, a language of ancient sorrow and desperate hope. As I continued, the temperature dropped further, the shadows in the room deepening and swirling around me. The faceless figure began to move, her presence becoming more pronounced as the ritual intensified. The air crackled with energy, and the whispers that had haunted me for weeks crescendoed into a deafening roar. I could feel Eleanor's pain, her anguish filling the room as I channeled my will into breaking the curse that bound her to this place. With a final, powerful incantation, I plunged my hands into the air, visualizing Eleanor's spirit finding peace. A blinding light filled the room, and the faceless figure let out a silent scream before dissolving into nothingness. The oppressive energy lifted, replaced by a serene calm that settled over the apartment. Breathing heavily, I collapsed to the floor, the exhaustion and relief washing over me in equal measure. The diary lay open beside me, its final entry now complete with my own signature. Freed. The days that followed were marked by a profound sense of peace. The haunting presence that had plagued me and my son dissipated, replaced by the comforting sounds of everyday life in Evergreen Heights. Jack's sleep improved, the nightmares fading into distant memories, and our interactions with the neighbors grew warmer and more genuine. Richard, the reclusive family across the street, began to emerge from his shell, his eyes holding a newfound warmth that hadn't been there before. It was as if the burden of their past had been lifted, allowing him and his family to reconnect with the community. One evening, as Jack and I sat on our balcony watching the sunset, he looked up at the house across the street and smiled. "Mom, I think Eleanor is happy now." I nodded, a tear slipping down my cheek. "I think you're right, Jack. I think she's finally at peace." As time went on, the story of our experience spread throughout Evergreen Heights, a tale of courage and compassion that resonated with the community. The Harris house, once a symbol of fear and mystery, became a place of remembrance, honoring the lives lost and the spirits freed. But every now and then, when the wind rustles through the trees and the pale blue light of the old gas station flickers in the distance, I'm reminded of the night we faced the darkness and emerged stronger for it. The lessons learned from Eleanor's struggle taught us the importance of understanding and empathy, the power of confronting our fears, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. And as I watch Jack grow into a confident young man, free from the shadows of his past, I know that our bond, forged in the fires of fear and triumph, will carry us through whatever challenges lie ahead. Evergreen Heights had given us more than just a new home. It had given us a story of resilience and hope that would be passed down for generations to come. Story number 4. Shadows of the Forgotten. I never believed in ghosts or curses. Growing up in the bustling city of Chicago, my life was filled with concrete jungles, the incessant hum of traffic, and the bright lights that never seemed to dim. But when I decided to leave behind the chaos and move to the quaint village of Willow Creek, I was seeking something different, a peaceful existence, a community where everyone knew your name, and a fresh start for me and my son, Jake. Willow Creek was everything I had hoped for. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, the village exuded a charm that was both timeless and inviting. The neighbors were friendly, the streets were clean, and the pace of life was gentle. I rented a cozy cottage at the end of Maple Street, directly across from the home of Mr. Martin, an elderly man who was known for his kindness and his beautiful garden. Mr. Martin and I quickly became friends. Every morning, he would tend to his roses while I prepared breakfast for Jake. In the afternoons, we'd chat over the fence, sharing stories and laughter. His presence was a comforting constant in our new lives, a reminder that we had made the right choice in moving to Willow Creek. But one crisp autumn morning, things began to change. I woke up to an unusually silent house. The birds were not singing, and there was no sound of Jake's playful footsteps. Assuming it was a late start, I went about my morning routine, preparing coffee and pancakes. When I glanced out the window, Mr. Martin's house was eerily quiet. The garden was immaculate as always, but Mr. Martin was nowhere to be seen. "Jake?" I called, but the house remained silent. Panic set in as I hurried outside, searching for any sign of him. The sun was already high in the sky, and there was still no trace of our friendly neighbor. My phone was within reach, but there was no signal in the village. Frantically, I knocked on Mr. Martin's door, hoping someone else might be home, but the door was locked. My heart raced as I pounded on it, calling his name into the empty street. Minutes felt like hours before I finally gave up and returned to my own home, my mind swirling with worry. As the days passed, I reached out to other neighbors, but to my astonishment, no one seemed to remember Mr. Martin. When I mentioned him to Mrs. Green next door, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Martin? I've never seen a Martin around here." Desperation drove me to investigate further. I decided to return to Mr. Martin's house, hoping to find some clue about his disappearance. As I approached the familiar front yard, I felt a strange unease. The house looked the same as always, neat and welcoming, but there was an unsettling stillness in the air. Inside, everything was as I had left it. The furniture was arranged meticulously, his garden tools neatly stored away, and a pot of freshly brewed tea sat on the kitchen table, as if he had just stepped out for a moment. My confusion deepened when I noticed a door at the back of the house that I hadn't seen before. It was slightly ajar, revealing a dimly lit room beyond. With Jake still missing, I knew I had to find him. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The room was unlike any other in Mr. Martin's house. It was a study, filled with shelves of old books, maps of Willow Creek, and numerous photographs. But what caught my attention was a large bulletin board on the wall, cluttered with pictures of the village residents. As I examined the board, my eyes were drawn to a series of photographs that depicted various families and individuals from Willow Creek. At first glance, they seemed like ordinary snapshots, birthdays, family gatherings, simple moments of everyday life. But then, something caught my eye. In each photograph, there was a dark shadow looming behind every person, a presence that seemed to hover just out of sight. My breath hitched as I realized the connection between these shadows and the disappearance of Mr. Martin. These photos were taken before the residents had vanished or been forgotten, and the shadows were always present, unnoticed by everyone except me. A sudden chill swept through the room, and I turned to see Jake standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with fear. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he whispered, clutching his backpack tightly. Before I could respond, the room plunged into darkness. The only light came from the flickering bulb above the bulletin board, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. I felt an oppressive presence closing in, the air thick with an unseen malevolence. "Jake, stay close," I urged, trying to shield him from the encroaching darkness. But the shadows seemed to have a life of their own, moving independently of any light source. I reached for his hand, but my fingers brushed against cold, invisible walls. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the room, and the bulletin board began to move on its own, the photographs sliding into a neat row as if guided by an unseen force. The shadows behind the figures in the photos began to grow darker, more defined, reaching out toward us with an insatiable hunger. "Mom, I can't see anything," Jake cried, his voice trembling. I knew we had to leave immediately. Grabbing Jake's hand, I pulled him toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me as the shadows pressed closer, their presence suffocating. The walls seemed to close in, the room shrinking around us as the darkness deepened. Desperation fueled my actions as I forcefully pushed against the door, my strength waning under the weight of the shadows. With a final, frantic effort, the door swung open, and we stumbled out into the night, the oppressive darkness of the study giving way to the cool, crisp air of the autumn evening. Breathing heavily, we raced back to our cottage, the haunting presence of the shadows lingering in our minds. As we reached the safety of our home, I realized that the disappearance of Mr. Martin was just the beginning. The shadows were not confined to his house, they were spreading, feeding off the fear and memories of Willow Creek's residents. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved deeper into the history of the village. I discovered old newspaper articles detailing unexplained disappearances, strange occurrences, and the eerie phenomenon of residents being forgotten by others. The shadows were a manifestation of something ancient and malevolent, a curse that fed on the essence of the villagers, trapping their souls and erasing their existence from the collective memory. One night, as I sat in the living room with Jake, the room began to grow cold. The same dark shadows from the photos crept along the walls, their presence almost tangible. I felt a compulsion to protect my son, to shield him from the curse that threatened to consume us both. "Jake, we have to leave," I said firmly, standing up to face the darkness. "We can't stay here any longer." But as I moved toward the front door, I saw it, a faceless figure standing in the doorway, its presence radiating pure malice. The shadows coalesced into a more defined form, a silhouette with hollow, empty eyes that seemed to pierce through my very soul. "You cannot escape," the figure intoned, its voice a chilling whisper that echoed in my mind. "You belong to us now." Fear paralyzed me as the shadows surged forward, their tendrils wrapping around my body, pulling me toward the darkness. Jake tried to resist, but the shadows were relentless, their grip tightening with each passing second. In that moment, I remembered the bulletin board in Mr. Martin's study, the photographs, the shadows, the curse. I knew that the key to breaking free lay in understanding and confronting the darkness head-on. Summoning every ounce of strength, I shouted back at the figure. "We won't let you take us. We're stronger than your curse." The shadows recoiled slightly, their grip loosening as my defiance ignited a spark of resistance. I realized that the curse thrived on fear and submission, and by standing up against it, I could weaken its hold. Gathering my thoughts, I began to recite the incantations I had found in the old diary at the library, a record of rituals and protections against malevolent forces. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but I pressed on, channeling my determination into each syllable. The shadows writhed and twisted, their forms distorting as the power of the incantation took hold. The faceless figure let out a scream, a sound of pure anguish and rage, as the darkness began to dissipate. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a sense of liberation that washed over me. With a final, powerful chant, the shadows disintegrated into nothingness, and the faceless figure vanished. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, as Jake rushed to my side. "It's over, Mom," he said, his eyes filled with relief and awe. But I knew it wasn't that simple. The curse had left its mark on Willow Creek, and the shadows were only part of a larger, more insidious force that threatened to consume the entire village. Determined to protect my son and the remaining residents, I vowed to uncover the origins of the curse and find a way to break it once and for all. As I embarked on this quest, I discovered that the curse was tied to a dark ritual performed by the original settlers of Willow Creek, a pact made with an ancient, malevolent entity that promised prosperity in exchange for the souls of the villagers. Over time, the entity had grown stronger, feeding on the fear and memories of the town, and the shadows were its means of maintaining control. Armed with this knowledge, I sought the help of a local historian, Mrs. Whitaker, who had spent her life researching the occult and the supernatural. Together, we delved into the town's archives, uncovering hidden truths and forgotten lore that pointed to a way to sever the curse's hold. We discovered that the ritual could be reversed, but it required a sacrifice, a willing soul to confront the entity and seal it away, ensuring that the shadows could no longer spread their darkness. It was a daunting task, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but I knew it was the only way to save Willow Creek and protect my son from the encroaching darkness. One stormy night, with rain lashing against the windows and thunder echoing through the hills, I prepared for the final confrontation. Armed with the knowledge and rituals provided by Mrs. Whitaker, I made my way back to Mr. Martin's abandoned house, the epicenter of the curse. The once welcoming garden was now overgrown and wild, the air thick with the scent of decay and despair. Entering the house, I felt the familiar presence of the shadows, now coalescing into a form more menacing than ever. The faceless figure reappeared, its hollow eyes fixed on me with a predatory gaze. "This ends tonight," I declared, holding the sacred talisman I had crafted from the rituals. "I'm here to break the curse and free your souls." The entity laughed, a sound that reverberated through the house like 1,000 broken promises. "You think you can challenge me? I am eternal. The shadows are my legacy." But I stood my ground, reciting the incantations with unwavering resolve. The talisman glowed brightly, channeling the pure energy of hope and defiance. The shadows writhed and twisted, their forms distorting as the power of the ritual began to take hold. The entity let out a scream of rage and anguish, its form beginning to crumble under the assault of the ritual's light. The walls of the house seemed to breathe and pulse with energy, the very foundation of the curse unraveling before my eyes. With a final, powerful chant, I plunged the talisman into the heart of the entity, and a blinding light filled the room. The shadows disintegrated, and the faceless figure let out a final, soul-wrenching cry before vanishing into nothingness. The oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by a serene calm that settled over the house. Exhausted but triumphant, I collapsed to the floor, the weight of the curse finally lifted from Willow Creek. The shadows were gone, and the memories of the lost residents were no longer fading from existence. The town could finally begin to heal, free from the malevolent force that had haunted it for decades. In the days that followed, life in Willow Creek returned to normal. The remaining residents welcomed me with open arms, grateful for my role in breaking the curse. Jake and I found a renewed sense of belonging, our bond stronger than ever after facing the darkness together. But the experience left an indelible mark on both of us. I became more attuned to the unseen forces that lingered in the world, and Jake, though still a curious teenager, learned the importance of understanding and empathy. We often thought back to those harrowing nights, the shadows that threatened to consume us, and the courage it took to stand against the darkness. Willow Creek thrived once more, its streets filled with laughter and life, the shadows of the past finally laid to rest. And as I watched Jake grow into a confident young man, I knew that our story would become a legend in the village, a tale of resilience, love, and the enduring power of hope against the encroaching darkness. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees and the pale blue light of the old gas station flickers in the distance, I catch a fleeting glimpse of a shadow, an echo of the past. A reminder that even in the most peaceful places, darkness can lurk, waiting to be confronted by those brave enough to seek the truth. Story number 5. The Mysterious Mailbox. I still remember the first day Samantha moved into Maplewood Estates. The neighborhood was a picturesque suburb, complete with white picket fences, manicured lawns, and friendly neighbors who greeted each other with warm smiles. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, yet respected each other's privacy. For Samantha, a young graphic designer seeking a fresh start after a messy breakup, Maplewood was the perfect escape from the chaos of city life. Our house was on the corner of Elm Street, giving us a bit more privacy than the other houses nestled together in the cul-de-sac. The community was tight-knit, with annual block parties and neighborhood watch groups that made everyone feel safe. But amidst all the charm and tranquility, there was one peculiar anomaly that everyone seemed to overlook, a mailbox that always stood empty, untouched by any resident. The mailbox in question was situated at the end of our driveway, slightly apart from the others in front of the houses. It was old-fashioned, with a metal flag that never seemed to move, and a worn-out design that made it look like it belonged to another era. Despite its odd placement, no one paid it much attention. It didn't have a house number or any distinguishing marks, and it was always devoid of mail. Some residents even joked that it was a decorative piece, a relic from Maplewood's early days. Samantha was naturally curious, a trait that had served her well in her design career but now bordered on obsession as she tried to uncover the secrets of our new neighborhood. She often spent her evenings sketching the houses and their unique features, the mysterious mailbox being one of her favorite subjects. I admired her tenacity, though I worried it might lead her into unnecessary trouble. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, Samantha decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. The air was cool, and the scent of fallen leaves filled the air. As she strolled past the other mailboxes, she couldn't help but cast curious glances toward the mysterious one at the end of our driveway. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she approached the mailbox, studying its intricate design. It was unlike any other mailbox in Maplewood, with elaborate engravings that seemed almost ornamental. As she reached out to touch it, she felt a chill run down her spine. The metal was cold to the touch, more so than the other mailboxes that were usually weathered by sun and rain. Suddenly, a shadow flickered across the mailbox, and Samantha jumped back, heart racing. She turned around, but there was no one there. The street was quiet, the only sounds being the rustling of leaves and the distant barkings of a dog. Shaking off the unease, she decided to leave it alone for the night. But that night, as she lay in bed, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The silence of the house was oppressive, and every creak and groan seemed amplified in the darkness. She tried to ignore it, convincing herself that it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. The following morning, Samantha woke up to find a letter in her mailbox. It was odd because none of the mailboxes in Maplewood ever had anything in them, especially not the one without an owner. The envelope was plain, white, with no return address, and her name was written in elegant, flowing script on the front. Curiosity piqued, she tore it open and read the message inside. Don't look into the empty mailbox. Once you do, you won't be able to escape. Her blood ran cold. Samantha reread the message several times, her mind racing to understand its meaning. She glanced out the window, expecting to see someone lurking near the mysterious mailbox, but the street was empty. No one else in the neighborhood had ever seen anyone near it, and she hadn't noticed anyone when she walked by the night before. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Samantha decided to investigate further. That evening, she sat at her desk, spreading out old maps and property records she'd obtained from the local library. She discovered that Maplewood Estates was built on what used to be farmland, and the mysterious mailbox had been part of a small cottage that no longer existed. Digging deeper, she found old newspaper clippings about a tragic incident that had occurred 10 years prior. A young family had moved into Maplewood, their home now gone, and the mailbox had been the only remnant of their existence. According to the articles, the family had mysteriously vanished without a trace, leaving behind their belongings and a mailbox that no one could explain. Samantha felt a chill as she realized the connection. The mailbox wasn't just a decorative piece, it was a silent witness to a tragedy that had been swept under the rug. Determined to uncover the truth, she decided to visit the mailbox alone that night, armed with her camera and a flashlight. As darkness settled over Maplewood, Samantha made her way to the mysterious mailbox. The street was silent, the only sound being her footsteps crunching on the gravel driveway. She approached the mailbox cautiously, shining her flashlight on its intricate design. The engraving seemed to shift and change as she looked closer, almost as if they were alive. Taking a deep breath, she reached out to touch it, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. Suddenly, the air grew heavy, and an oppressive silence descended upon her. She felt a presence, a cold whisper that seemed to seep into her very soul. "Don't look into the mailbox," the voice echoed in her mind, sending shivers down her spine. Ignoring the warning, Samantha leaned in closer, peering into the dark interior. At first, she saw nothing but shadows, but as her eyes adjusted, she began to make out faint shapes moving within. Faces, twisted in pain and fear, stared back at her from the depths of the mailbox. Terrified, she tried to pull away, but her hand remained stuck to the metal as if an invisible force held her in place. The faces began to scream, their voices merging into a cacophony of anguish that filled her head. "You shouldn't have looked," they wailed, their eyes pleading for release. Samantha's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to free herself, but the more she resisted, the stronger the hold became. She could feel herself being pulled into the darkness, the faces reaching out to her, their pain consuming her very being. Just as she was about to be engulfed by the shadows, a blinding light filled the mailbox, pushing back the darkness. Samantha was yanked away, falling back onto the gravel driveway, gasping for breath. The oppressive presence lifted, leaving her trembling and shaken. Breathing heavily, she looked up to see the silhouette of an old man standing nearby, his face obscured by shadows. "You must leave," he warned, his voice firm yet sorrowful. "The mailbox holds the memories of those who vanished. They are trapped, unable to move on. Don't let them take you too." Before she could respond, the man vanished, leaving Samantha alone with the lingering fear and the haunting memory of the faces she had seen. Determined to protect herself and others, Samantha decided to seek help. She reached out to the local authorities, but they dismissed her claims as nothing more than figments of her imagination. Undeterred, she turned to the community, sharing her experience with anyone who would listen. Slowly, other residents began to come forward with their own stories of strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena linked to the mysterious mailbox. The once dismissive neighbors now shared a collective fear, united by the unspoken truth that something dark and malevolent lingered in Maplewood Estates. Together, they formed a neighborhood watch, patrolling the streets at night and keeping a vigilant eye on the mailbox. Despite their efforts, the presence seemed to grow stronger, the shadows deepening and the whispers becoming more persistent. One night, as Samantha stood guard by the mailbox, she felt a familiar chill and heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. The old man from before emerged from the darkness, his face still obscured but his eyes now visible, hollow voids that seemed to drain the light from the world around him. "You cannot break the curse alone," he said, his voice echoing with a sorrow that weighed heavily on her heart. "The spirits are restless, and the entity that binds them is powerful. You must find the source of their torment to set them free." Samantha knew what she had to do. She delved deeper into the history of Maplewood Estates, uncovering stories of old rituals and dark pacts made by the original settlers. It became clear that the mailbox was not just a symbol of the vanished family, but a conduit for the spirits trapped within, their anguish fueling the malevolent force that sought to keep them bound to the mortal realm. Armed with this knowledge, Samantha and the neighborhood embarked on a mission to cleanse the area, performing rituals and honoring the memories of those who had been lost. They gathered artifacts, recited prayers, and created memorials to acknowledge the lives that had been cut short. As they worked together, the oppressive presence began to wane, the shadows receding and the whispers turning into gentle echoes of gratitude. The faces that once screamed in agony now smiled peacefully, their eyes filled with relief as they found the closure they had long sought. One final night, as Samantha stood by the mailbox with her neighbors, the old man reappeared. This time, his expression was one of serenity. "You have done well," he said softly. "The spirits are free, and the curse is lifted. Maplewood can finally move forward." With those words, the dark energy dissipated, leaving behind a sense of calm and renewal. The mailbox, once a symbol of fear and mystery, now stood as a memorial to the lives lost and the community's resilience in the face of darkness. In the days that followed, Maplewood Estates transformed. The streets were filled with laughter and life once more, the bonds between neighbors strengthened by their shared experience. Samantha and her son felt a renewed sense of belonging, knowing that they had played a pivotal role in saving their new home from the shadows that had threatened to consume it. But sometimes, when the wind rustles through the trees and the pale light of dusk casts long shadows on the ground, Samantha catches a glimpse of a faint figure standing by the mailbox, watching over the neighborhood with a silent vigilance. It's a reminder that even in the most peaceful places, the echoes of the past can linger, waiting for those brave enough to confront them and set the spirits free. And as she looks into the reflection of her window, Samantha knows that the true strength of a community lies not just in its unity, but in its willingness to face the darkness together, ensuring that the light of hope always prevails.